Hi Ken.
George, how are you, mate? Good to see you.
Yes. Let's quickly just go back over what we think we achieved in the last topics. I think we looked at the nature of economics and its purview. Would you like to comment on that?
Well, the idea was that we want to introduce our students to the idea of the basic economic problem, that problem of relative scarcity where resources, land, labour, capital at any one point in time are fixed, finite, limited, and we have to make decisions about what we're going to use them for. And in fact, every society has to make that decision, that what are we going to produce, how are we going to produce it, for whom are we producing. So it's a universal problem, and we've decided that, or probably the really core gutsy thing to come out of the topic was the notion of opportunity cost. If you allocate resources to the production of one thing, like guns, you can't produce another thing, food, wheat, butter, Levi jeans, whatever. So big cost, sacrifice, that trade-off, the sacrifice of the next best alternative. So
societies face scarcity,
yeah.
and in the face of unlimited wants.
Yes, and that's actually a bit of a point of debate, the unlimited wants thing, but as I say to my students, if you've ever had teenage children, you'll actually understand what unlimited wants means.
Exactly, yes.
It's true.
And so we have to have a system.
A system.
One system could be a dictator who simply says, listen, this society only needs black cars and they only have to travel at 30 kilometers an hour.
That's it.
And any other thing is useless because we need resources to be used for guns or some other national objective.
Mm-hmm.
Or else you could allow markets.
Free markets.
Yes. Free markets.
The notion of laissez-faire capitalism, freedom of speech, freedom of choice, freedom of enterprise. Individuals are encouraged to own the means of production, to actually combine their resources to make profit for themselves, and that's essentially the ideology of our economy in Australia, which we acknowledge is essentially a market-based economy, but with some contribution from what we call the public sector or the government. So there's our modern mixed economy.
Yes.
But where we go with this is that we're going to say, okay, the answers to the what, how and for whom questions are largely provided in a market economy by the role of what we call the price mechanism or the functioning of prices. And that's where we're going in topic 2, to actually see how those prices are actually arrived at.
And the other thing we have to, that we discussed in the first part of the course, was this idea that economists have a unique way of looking at these issues through models, because reality is too complex to ascertain, to use as a predictive tool.
Sure.
And so we simplify, find out which variables are important, and then use that sort of
and we'll see that particularly with our initial analysis of our demand and supply, where we employ a simplifying assumption which we know as ceteris paribus, where we'll actually hold all the factors affecting demand constant except one, and that is price. Yes. And all the factors affecting supply constant except one, which is price. And we'll look at what we come up with respect to holding those factors constant and varying only the price. We'll look at what we will come up with. We'll come up with what we call a demand schedule or demand curve, and a supply schedule and supply curve. And what we'll actually ascertain with our simplified little model is that there's only one price where the quantity willingly demanded is equal to the quantity willingly supplied.
Okay. So now, let's quickly define what we mean by a market. What is a market?
Good question. It's our obviously a place where buyers and sellers can interact to exchange goods and services, but it's not necessarily anymore they have to be in the same physical proximity. So we've seen with the rise of the internet particularly and buying online that buyers and sellers can actually exchange goods and services and not be in the same place.
Exactly.
So what we're looking at though with our initial analysis is what you and I call a competitive or purely competitive market,
Yes.
where we've got many small firms, each producing a homogeneous or identical product, and no one firm is large enough to affect market price by withholding supply. So each firm's contribution to industry output is actually almost negligible. We're looking at ease of entry, we're looking at firms being price takers, and we're looking, of course, under the assumption, and this is a big assumption, that all consumers are perfectly informed.
Yes, exactly.
And when we relax some of those, we can actually see that some of the imperfectly competitive structures we'll look at later in the course, monopoly, oligopoly, and even monopolistic competition, where consumers actually have limited choice. And in many cases, they're not perfectly informed, and the firms get to exert a degree of market power, which firms in pure competition don't enjoy.
Okay, so to conclude then, we are discussing a market which has very narrow characteristics,
Yep.
or restrictive, maybe not narrow, but restrictive characteristics,
Yep.
and we will draw some conclusions from that. What are examples of that market that students could relate to?
One of the closest things we get to is agricultural markets,
Yes.
and markets for agricultural produce. On a big scale, wheat
Yeah.
and wool, where you've got 30,000 plus wheat farmers and sheep farmers in Australia. In a smaller context, your local produce markets are pretty close, where any number of growers bring their produce in to a central point, and as long as you've got the time to actually walk up and down and actually ascertain that they are homogenous, then the price takers are the prices that you're prepared to pay, etc. So it is a bit simplifying. We go a bit further removed, we go to the stock exchange.
Yes.
Again, homogenous service.
Yes.
The acquisition,
And of course,
or the sale of stocks.
and of course, the foreign exchange market.
Forex market.
Foreign
yes,
market.
exactly.
Okay, so now, in the end, our objective is to show that supply and demand forces in this purely competitive market determine a price at which goods are exchanged, and this implies certain level of resource allocation.
Yes.
Land, labour, capital, and entrepreneurship are
Channel.
sucked in or channeled towards the production of those, and that they are what.
So back in topic one, we talked briefly about consumer sovereignty.
Yes.
And the fact that the dollar votes and our expenditures will actually determine what it is that producers will produce. And of course they're motivated to do that, because to not do it would mean that they'd go out of business. So there is that guiding function, which is actually quite crucial with respect to prices. So
Okay, so what we'll do now is we'll move on to actually looking at the way in which that price is
Yep.
determined within that market.
yep, no worries.